Hello and welcome to the first ever Super High Roller Bowl Mixed Game Edition, $100,000 buy-in here in Las Vegas at the PokerGO studio. I'm Alex Livingston, joined by Chris Vitch to call the action.
Hey Alex, I am super excited to be here on the side of you. I suppose the only more exciting place would be out there in the field, but
yeah,
I'm going to have to settle for this one today.
We talked about that a little bit, both of us, maybe a little bit of FOMO not playing, but it's going to be fun to call the action and watch these guys play all 10 of these games. And here we have our first look at the feature table. We've got J. David Rogers, Eric Wasserson, Yuri, Benny Glazer, Daniel Negreanu, Ray D, and Johannes Becker.
I saw how you slipped right over Yuri's last name there. You didn't want to go in for the Zivulevsky?
Yeah, Yuri and Ray D both with slightly difficult to pronounce last names. You see not a ton of movement so far in the first two levels of play. We are picking this up in level 3. There's Daniel Negreanu. Recent victory for him in the $15,000 Dealer's Choice Tournament.
Dominant victory, one would say.
Yeah, he came in, I think, second or third in chips and just very quickly had about 70% of the chips in play. It had a real stranglehold on the rest of the players. Yeah, recently got back from Cambodia. He said he was there mostly just as a vacation, but also did play some of the higher stakes, no-limit tournaments there.
All right, we got some multi-way action here, Alex.
Yeah, Wasserson with slightly a loose call out of the small blind, but again with the 1.5, he is getting a slightly better price to call, and we see him get rewarded for that loose call, flopping top 2 pair.
Ray D has a hand here that I suppose I could overvalue at times, kind of this bottom wrap, the wheel wrap here.
He does, and I wonder if with the big club in his hand, he might be tempted to bet this hand, thinking he's going to get check raised a little bit less often, although he doesn't get that opportunity as Negreanu makes a very non-standard lead with just one overpair here and one club. No immediate straight draws. He does have backdoor hearts. There's certainly some turns he can barrel, but I would describe this as unorthodox. I will say that this board is going to hit Negreanu's range perhaps harder than either of the other two players. So
I was going to add, I think that's what he's thinking, is that the 7-5 deuce is the big blind's board texture.
And while I agree with that, and I agree with leading a fair chunk of hands, I'm not sure I would throw this particular one in. He does get called in 2 spots. Note Wasserson top 2 pair here, but just thinking that's not quite enough hand to want to check raise this deep.
And now a scare card for everyone. I guess this kind of favors Ray D's range.
Yeah, I'm thinking if anyone has any incentive to bet this card, it's probably Ray with the big club. He still has some outs against sets and 2 pairs, so it's kind of a semi-bluff that can get some made hands to fold and still retains equity against all the non-flushes, but it does just check through. And Eric might just win this pot. It might just go check, check, check again.
Yeah, the only one who really doesn't have anything to call or to check down is Negreanu, but
right. Ray D's picked up a sliver of showdown value, and Negreanu does decide to fire the bluff here, and I suspect this will get through. Ray's problem here is that he has another player behind him, in addition to the fact that he just has 1 pair in a multi-way pot, and then it's extremely hard for Wasserson to call, in my opinion, with no club in his hand.
Yeah, this is a nice find from Daniel to steal this pot with really very little equity. As Was gives him the good bluff speech, and Negreanu acknowledges, yep.
Showing the camera. You bluffed?
Point, and given the price, especially in an ante-level like this, you should want to be playing a lot of hands and fighting for pots.
Wasserson goes with a bit of a different strategy here, stealing into a number of low cards with ace-ace-3.
Yeah, this looks a little loose to me from Wasserson. Just staring right into 2 wheel cards behind him, and Rogers makes a bit of a tight fold there with the 4 up and the 8-7 behind.
I agree. I think that was a close one, and maybe one that many of the players would err on the side of playing in this level.
Now Ray D would rather not be showing his 8, but still he's going to get in there. And look at Wasserson really opened this into 4 cards 8 or under behind him, which is
and a big stylistic difference here between the way Ray D choosing to play this hand, which is basically a very similar holding to Rogers' hand.
Right.
Oh God.
Now everyone catches good, quote unquote, and nobody pairs.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Was navigates this situation now that he knows that ace has to, not has to be, but almost always is a very good card for Negreanu, knowing that he already blocks 2 aces.
Right. Now, Chris, maybe this is a spot we can also talk about the squeeze play. Let's say Wasserson had caught a 10 here, or a 9.
Oh, he just bails immediately.
And he does just get out of the way.
That also seems a little tight to me.
But if Wasserson had caught a bad card, there's a chance Ray would have raised just to get rid of Wasserson, even though he knows his 8-6 isn't best right now against Negreanu's ace-5.
Right, as we can see, Negreanu had a very strong hand here, but only had 55% equity. I guess it does come from the fact that he has an 8 in the hole. But you're right that in this game, if you can eliminate a player and increase your equity, it's often worth it even if you are slightly behind against one other player, as the hands do tend to run close on the early streets.
Right, now Negreanu doesn't love this because he's, a card behind, but a fair chunk of the time Ray will have paired one of those cards.
I believe a 4 was dead on Roger's board, so Negreanu is definitely very concerned that that Ray has a legit holding here. But obviously, given the size of the pot and the fact that Negreanu is drawing live to a smooth 8, I think he's certainly going to have to continue.
Yeah, so Negreanu's always live here because even if Ray has ace-deuce in the hole, Negreanu could still catch a deuce or a 3 to improve to beat him. So forced to call, the pot's starting to grow.
And actually, Negreanu has made the second. Well, no, he's made the best hand. This is a very close one. 8-6-5-4-1 versus 8-6-5-4-3. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now Negreanu's checking here, and a lot of the time he's going to have a made 9.
Yeah. I think Ray D can go for value here. If he paired that 4, he would definitely be incentivized to bluff here. And it does look like Negreanu has a 9. I mean, he absolutely can get called by a 9 in this spot.
Yeah. It's always a touch thin to go for value in these spots just because you do face the possibility of getting check raised. Negreanu would want to check raise when he does make a very strong hand here.
I think Negreanu could have considered check raising if he didn't get the speech play here.
Okay, it's set 5 you could have.
And Negreanu
8-6,
realizing he beats some
5,
value. And anytime in a limit game
ace,
when you can beat value.
8-6-5.
Yeah, I
4,
mean,
3.
certainly he could
Winner.
not fold. He could also just beat a bluff, right?
Right.
But I think if Negreanu was really thinking through the situation, he could have considered even going for a very thin check raise, knowing that it's impossible that his opponent can really 3-bet him without a 6, given the strength of his board. Nevertheless, he drags in a nice pot.
About it, which makes a lot of sense. Ras now has split jacks and a few fewer players behind him.
Yeah, I see a queen staring right in his face from Mercier.
Yeah, so this is already perhaps a little bit on the border with a queen behind him.
And a king behind him who does indeed have the king.
I actually would describe this open as a little bit loose. What do you think, Chris, with
Yeah.
the queen and the king behind?
I think it is, especially in this ante-structure. By the way, this is a dream situation for Nick Schulman. I know his hand doesn't look like much. He has the 2-3-5. But when you have a very well-connected 3-card low hand against 2 high hands, you're in a very advantageous position because you're getting a good price on all your money, and it's very clear what your opponents have. Your hand is very easy to play.
And he still has some high potential, too.
Disappointing
3-5
for him
deuce.
to catch the jack right away, but easy for him to play the situation in general.
Yeah, very ugly street for Nick. And what Nick's concern would be here, he is going to call the 5K.
Very ugly street for Rast as well, seeing that jack fall dead.
Right. Yeah, Rast already in kind of a world of hurt, really just hoping that the king has something like 2 low diamonds in the hole.
Nick hits gin on 5th Street. He has an open-ended straight draw and a 4-card low. Look at how much equity he has in both directions in this situation.
And Chris, I think that Brian can actually get away on this street. There's a jack dead.
I like a raise from Nick here, actually.
Yeah, interesting. Nick can certainly, his hand is, but you know what? He wants to keep Rast in. That's maybe
that's
one
a good
reason for
point.
calling, trying to just get half the pot. Yes, he has a hand that can scoop, so you could argue for just raising as kind of a pure value raise, but getting Rast to continue some of his more marginal hands is actually advantageous for Nick, where he's the only one who really has a chance of making the low. And Brian makes what I consider to be a little bit too loose of a call here.
Yeah, you make
It's
a good point.
It's not like Albert's just going to continue betting all of his range at this point, especially when Nick caught so good. Wow,
Now-
what a strange street.
Yeah, Nick definitely does not want to bet in this situation. It's very clear that one of his opponents has a higher pair, if not both of his opponents.
And
But-
Brian's actually made 2 pair.
Nick still has a sizable chunk of equity here.
And Albert's made kings up. Albert has a very easy bet here.
Yeah, Albert's in a great position here. He understands that his opponents just really cannot have him beat at this moment.
And having made 2 pair, I think Brian's going to be stuck in this pot, even with those 2 dead jacks. And this is just, really, I think that Brian made a small mistake on 3rd Street that is just compounded across
Yeah, you
future
called
streets.
it. There's an old school concept in Stud 8 which I think holds true, which is that you never want to play the second best high hand.
Right.
You can play the second best low because you can just improve. But the problem for the high hands is that they tend to stay behind the best high hand, and that's exactly what you're seeing happen in this hand. Rast has basically 0 outs, right? He has 1-7.
Nick still has scooping possibilities, of course.
Yeah, and I think Albert can go for value here, knowing that he
Ooh.
has Rast still in the pot. However, it kind of looks like Rast picked up
It
the
is
spade
Nick to
flush
act
draw.
first, and now that Nick bets, I don't believe that well, so Brian's just in this really dumb spot. He's
Yeah.
going to have to still continue to call down, and Brian actually has this really a tricky decision.
I think Albert can maybe go for a raise here.
I can understand why, because he beats all the jacks up, but he does have some concern he could be scooped by Nick, who could be playing low hearts or the straight, but I agree, it's very close.
I mean, Nick can bet any low.
Yeah, we can see Nick's hand and see that against Nick's hand he doesn't want to raise, but I agree, and I think in a cash game,
He just calls.
he does just call.
And a big scoop for Nick Schulman here, 142K pot. The pots can get very big in stud 8 as all players involved in multi-way situations have incentive to continue.
Yeah, and I think the hand was very normal from both Nick and Albert, and I think once Brian decided to play the hand on third, fourth was normal, I would have folded fifth, sixth was normal again.
Yeah.
So I really don't like Brian's play there on third and fifth streets, but, you know, these spots are close, there's a lot out there to fight for. It's just very difficult to play these, and I think that kind of illustrates why these medium to big pairs can be really difficult hands.
They're very tough hands to play, for sure.
Cards. I just think it's slightly too thin to start going for value here. Jason's still going to have some hands like Queen 7 and 7-7 that are checking to check call.
That makes sense.
And Albert also doesn't have any of the straight blockers in his hand. Wow.
Oh, wow. What a card.
Now this is a very difficult card for Jason because he's going to really feel like he has the best hand here.
Yeah, having a queen blocker in this situation seems very relevant, right? Like, it's not super easy for your opponent to have a full house here.
Right. I mean, now Jason's not going to think he always has the best hand.
Right, they're not going to just pile all the money in necessarily.
Right, but he's certainly going to think, I believe, that his hand is worth value betting, and then Albert almost certainly going to raise, especially if the bet is a small one, like a blocker size.
Yeah, if Jason, I was just going to ask you, if Jason bets huge here, Albert would just call?
Correct.
Okay.
Because now he's losing to stuff like 7-7, but I think versus this smaller bet, Albert is going to find the value raise. I think you could go with something slightly smaller than pot, to be honest.
I think he went big.
He went big, but not pot.
Okay.
He could have made it about 240,000.
Oh, he could have almost
Could have
shoved.
made it 234, yeah, and he went to 127, so about half pot.
And as you said, Jason's immediately...
And Jason hates life. So
Yeah,
what Jason
in
has
a
to think
in a
about here
tough spot.
is, what are the weakest hands that Albert is going to call the flop with?
And it's a good thing Ras was asking about the time extensions because we are using a number of them in this hand.
And it's funny because I mentioned that Jason might not be someone using them because he was using them in his chip stack, but you know, a very serious decision here for him and one that warrants some thought.
Call.
The one card at a time is never good.
Not a bad line. Albert's jacket probably wasn't $20 either.
I like coming in for a raise because then, yeah, that's fine. And
Yeah.
he's going to run into it here a little bit. But you have a 3-card wheel without the deuce, but you do have a pair blocker, which is nice.
Nick's hand is one that in single draw, you know, if your opponent draws one, I'm always tempted to break it just to draw smooth and be able to
Yeah.
value bet, but usually the 10 is just too good.
I think at a certain depth it becomes an option.
Right. And of
But-
course in triple draw, you're just breaking this every time. And Nick would
Right.
break a 9 here too, by the way, if he had 9, 7, 6, 5
Yep,
deuce.
and he does improve to the 8. And Albert Docker hits the gutter ball here, which is a little bit annoying, but in a blind battle in a 3-bet pot, you certainly need to continue and draw out this gut shot.
absolutely,
You're
yeah.
duck hunting here.
And a lot of Nick's pad hands here are going to be weaker stuff, so there's going to be some 9s in there.
I'll be interested to see if Albert bricks on the turn, whether he continues to draw at this.
It does get close because against the 8s, oh, and he makes the 8.
Ooh.
Now, I think this is just going to go call, pat, pat, possibly check, check. I think Albert's hand is a little bit too weak to go for value with an 8-7-6.
Yeah, he had one blocker, not super relevant in this spot. Could Nick consider breaking?
I don't think so because I think that Albert's going to have some 9s. There's still one
Yeah.
worse 8 that exists.
We keep seeing these wide range situations, right? Small blind, big blind
Yeah.
battles are very difficult to ever get away from any 8.
Also, the danger of breaking as Nick is that, like, when you break incorrectly, it is such a huge mistake, whereas when you pad incorrectly,
Wow, I'm actually surprised that Nick's went for value
this,
with this
I think,
hand,
is
though.
too thin.
I do agree, yeah.
I would value bet 8-7-5s and better,
I think there's a big gap there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think Albert's going to get away from... I mean, it's not going to accidentally be a bluff here. I think Albert will pay this.
I mean,
He's tempted to
I
fold,
think
though.
I think Albert could actually fold this.
Yeah, he's definitely tempted to fold. I
And-
mean, it's not looking good.
I mean, this could be a sick bluff from Nick if that was his intention.
Yeah, you're right.
It's not something I ever would have considered in the moment.
Wow, and he does get it through. So,
I'd love to talk to Nick about that hand.
yeah, I wonder if he...
Um,
what his thought process was there. That's an interesting
That's very interesting. Not something I would have considered, but
one.
I mean,
Albert's going to be sick.
Albert's fold makes some sense to me.
It
I mean,
absolutely does,
You've
yeah.
gone pat. You know you have some weaker hands in there, but you also have some stronger hands.
But
And
just decides to fold.
also,
And we
given
see
his
Ashton
stack
defending.
size, perhaps he's going to just avoid some of those questionable snow
Yeah.
spots.
I like seeing this defense from Ashton because this is the kind of hand I always want to play, but you know it's tough to play. It's a marginal holding, 8-7-4 in the big blind
I
defending.
would lean towards folding this versus a hijack open, but it is close.
And now he improves to a gutter draw with a pair. Will he think that? So typically with the gut shot, you might like to check and call, but the pair blockers make you want to bet a little bit more. I'm curious to see which way he leans.
Or could you even make this a snow candidate again?
Not yet, but maybe on the next street. So he's seeing that he's had 2 pair blockers, so he's going with a lead play.
Yeah.
And this also indicates to me that if he catches one more blocker, he very likely
I think
would
so.
snow.
Especially where Chad's drawing 2, and where his draw's not that premium.
Yeah. Okay, so now he's just going to play his 10 as a pat, right? He no longer needs to snow. He made a value hand. Chad catches an interesting combo. Chad has seen a pair of 2s. It would be very tempting to raise this hand, I think.
Often what you're going to see in these spots is that the 10 raises more often than the 9.
Right.
Because the 9 actually wants to freeze some worse hands, whereas the 10 can actually break some 9s and then play it as a pat if you get the break, and draw if you don't.
So Chad's going with the call, which tells me that if Ashton pats, he's just planning to just draw 2.
He's going to draw, yeah.
He didn't give himself the opportunity to get a better hand to break or anything like that. He just went with the straightforward play. By the way, Ashton would have been in a really difficult situation had he gotten raised here. It's very unclear what he should do with his hand.
I think I would just tend to fold Ashton's hand facing a raise. It's such an ugly
And
draw
now
to draw
Chad's going to
to.
go for a bluff, having seen a pair of 2s and a pair of 5s. I do think that having that 10 in his hand was actually kind of a bad card to bluff with here.
Because he wants his opponent to have a 10, but
I
even
think so.
You can put a lot of pressure even on a 9 here, I think. But
Ashton is not going to fold.
pair pot's just too big. But you know what? I like that Chad goes for it here because I think some players just really never bluff this spot.
Yeah.
This is a very good hand.
In the pat 1
This
spots.
is a very high-level hand that got played here. This was a very good hand for Ashton to call with on the river.
And Hennigan has the same hand as Evislage. Hennigan should be probably incentivized to make it another raise.
Absolutely.
To try to get Ashton's weakest hands to fold. And
Scott
Seaver
picks up a hand. What,
Wow.
what a setup of a Raz
This
hand
is actually a tough spot for Scott. Usually you would always play 3 to a 7, and likely he still gets in
He's
there,
coming.
but it's at least close.
Maybe Ashton ducks out of the way?
I think so. I would fold as Ashton with the 7-8-3. It's just, in my opinion, just slightly too weak going 4 ways.
Yeah, he opened a hand with 1 dead pair, and all hell broke loose
And
behind
I think
him.
if Scott's hand was more like a 7-6-4, something like that, or a 7-5-4, he might, maybe not 7-6-4 where the 6s are dead, but 7-5-4, he might have even got out of the way.
Now, I think in theory Chad was supposed to raise again. I believe he did. Okay, yes. So Chad correctly raised again, showing the, against the 7-up card.
Yeah.
They are punishing Scott for his play, but it's not a big
yeah.
mistake.
And I know if Scott had an 8, he would have folded it, an 8-5 ace. I'm almost certain. But the 7, he just deems a little bit too good.
And it's World who catches best.
Now, these are the spots where sometimes a player can get sandwiched.
Well,
not in this case.
Yeah, this is a situation now where you have to be pretty sticky because the pot is massive from a 4-bet pre-multi-way.
It is, but when you're potentially facing 5 bets,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
can be really dicey.
And everyone has caught well on 5th. This is going to be a big pot. This is going to be a pot, probably the pot of the tournament here. Bigger
Yeah.
than those PLO pots we saw earlier.
Yeah,
for
you're
sure.
right. Seaver actually...
Nobody can get away from their hand now.
Correct.
And Hennigan is in a great spot here with the best hand and the best draw.
Chad kind of hates life if Hennigan actually has the 8 that he's
Yeah.
sort of quote-unquote supposed to have, although he still does have outs against all the 8s.
But this is where the pot being so big is just working against him. And it's Scott who pulls ahead, catches a gin card.
Yeah.
That 6 is a super dead card. And he just is aware of it, and John checked to him. Hennigan was aware that that 6 was a super, super good card.
Right, so it's a lot less likely to have paired Scott.
And now maybe Chad can find the exit looking at these boards.
It's so tough when the pocket's this big, but yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but what does Seaver have? He
I
called
think
3 cold.
Yeah, I think Chad has to fold here because even if somehow Seaver doesn't have what he's supposed to have, Hennigan still has outs against him, and he can still just be in like really bad shape against Hennigan's hand.
So after this hand, we're going to have one player under 100K and one player above a starting stack, depending on what this river
I
card
could
is.
be wrong, but did Hennigan check this?
I
Dark?
believe he did, which is probably just right. Seaver should probably just go ahead and bet.
And he's going to hope that Seaver value bets all his 7s, and if Hennigan does improve to a 6, he's going to be able to get the check raise in.
And John is sad. Or maybe angry, is a better word.
I think that's a better word, yeah.